Would you call me a religious man? Or would you call yourself a religious person? I'm not wearing my dog collar today, so if you don't know that I'm a vicar, then I don't know if you would call me a religious man or not. Come to think of it, even if I had my collar on, I'm not sure whether you would call me a religious man or not. I was reading the Bible the other day and reading again part of one of my favourite letters. It's James's letter in the New Testament. If anyone considers himself religious and yet does not keep a tight rein on his tongue, he deceives himself and his religion is worthless. Let me just change a few words in that sentence for a moment. If anyone considers herself religious and yet does not keep a tight rein on her tongue, she deceives herself and her religion is worthless. Well, what about changing the words even more? I'm going to use my name. You use yours. If Simon considers himself religious and yet does not keep a tight rein on his tongue, he deceives himself and his religion is worthless. Now you might say to call someone a religious man or to identify yourself as being or not being religious, you need to kind of understand what religion is. People will describe and define these terms in many, many different ways. Does going to church make you religious? Well, if religion is about doing something in a habitual sort of way, then clearly maybe it does. There is a clue, of course, in the letter of James. Again, I'm reading from the first chapter, and I'm reading from the verses that immediately follow what I read a moment ago. So I started in chapter 1 of James, reading at verse 26, and now I'm picking up verse 27. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Well, I didn't mention anything about wearing a collar there. I didn't mention anything about going to church. Now, don't get me wrong, worshipping together in a corporate way, being part of the body of Christ as church, which does involve attending a particular place at a particular time from time to time, but also means that we're involved in the world when we're not gathered together in a building. Don't get me wrong, that's good and that's right. And don't get me wrong, as a person who's called to be a priest and has been ordained as a priest in the Church of England, it's appropriate to wear the collar sometimes. But it's interesting here that James writes for us. And remember, this is the half-brother of Jesus. Religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress. There's something there about the pastoral sensitivity, the looking for those who are more needy. It's not just about first century family and households and the fact that widows and orphans were in a dangerous position if the head of the house, the man at the time, died and was no longer there. You can extend actually those words, widows and orphans, and think of the poor, the lowly, those who don't have as much. Jesus extends a lot of things, doesn't he? When he talks about the commandment for committing adultery, he talks about, well, what about when you look at someone walking down the street? Takes it further. Well, I think we can take these words of James a little further too. Not just about orphans and widows. It's about the least. It's about the lost. It's about the lowly. It's about those who don't have. What are we doing about caring for them? Where's our compassion? Do we seek them? Do we stand with them? Do we help them? Religion that God accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress. And then it continues, and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. Paul talks about being conditioned from the inside out, and not allowing the world in which we live on the outside to condition and transform who we are and how we are and what we think and how we live. In Romans, he encourages us to be transformed by the renewal of our mind. So that's about standing with the Lord, that's standing with God, that's reading the Word, that's praying, that is ensuring that what we are taking in from the inside, through our eyes, through our mind, is what shapes and forms us, rather than what you see on the news, or what you read in the paper, or what you see on the streets. In actual fact, what you see on the news, what you read in the paper, and what you see on the streets, hopefully will lead you to the looking after orphans and the widows and the needy and the least and the lost and the lowly. Because conditioning ourselves from the inside out by aligning ourselves with God, in seeking out those who don't have so much and are in more need, that's the sort of religion that is faultless and pure in God's eyes.